The phone call that dismantled everything lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know because it was still on the screen when Natalie came downstairs and found me sitting at the kitchen table with her father's voice still echoing in my head like a sound that hadn't finished bouncing off the walls. My name is Ryan Calloway. I'm 38 years old. I shoot commercial photography for a living. Product work, corporate headshots, some editorial. And until that Thursday evening in March, I believed my marriage was going through a difficult season. Not a crisis. A season. The kind of sustained, weatherable difficulty that long marriages accumulate the way houses accumulate small repairs. You notice the draft, you mean to seal it, life keeps moving and the draft becomes part of the atmosphere. Frank Mercer had called my cell by accident. He'd meant to call Natalie's number and hit mine instead. Our names are adjacent in his contacts, he explained, laughing lightly at himself, the way a 63-year-old man laughs at technology he never fully trusted. He wanted to tell Natalie that he and Diane were planning to visit in April, that they were so glad things had settled down between us, that it sounded like the counseling had really helped, that they were proud of how hard we'd both been working on the marriage. The counseling, I said. A pause. The specific pause of a man who has just understood he has said something he wasn't supposed to. The Ryan she told us, I mean, Natalie mentioned. Frank stopped. Collected himself. I think I may have confused something. Forget I said that. Is Natalie around? She's upstairs, I said. I'll tell her you called. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down our street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen window. Ethan was in bed. I'd checked on him 20 minutes ago, found him asleep with his arm around a stuffed soccer ball he'd received for his birthday, and hadn't let go of since. I sat very still and thought about what Frank had said. Counseling. Things had settled down. They were proud of how hard we'd been working. Natalie and I were not in counseling. We had not been in counseling. The last time the word had even come up was 8 months ago, when I'd suggested it after a bad week and Natalie had said she'd think about it, and the subject had never been raised again. What we had been doing for the past 8 months was not counseling. It was the slow, grinding work of two people trying to coexist inside a marriage that had developed a fundamental problem neither of us had fully named out loud. The fundamental problem had a name. I just hadn't been saying it. Her name was the problem. Not literally. I mean the question beneath everything. Whether Natalie was still fully in this marriage. Whether the distance I felt from her was grief or strategy. Whether the version of our life she was maintaining for the outside world had any relationship to the version we were actually living. Now I had my answer, delivered accidentally by a 63-year-old man who had hit the wrong name in his contacts. She had been telling her parents we were in counseling. That things had settled down. That we were working on it together. She had been building them a fiction of a marriage in recovery, and they had been watching from Traverse City, relieved and proud, while the actual marriage was something else entirely. I heard her on the stairs. The particular third step creak that I knew the way I knew every sound in this house, the furnace, the back door, the specific silence of Ethan sleeping. She came into the kitchen in her socks and a gray cardigan and stopped when she saw my face. Your dad called, I said. Wrong number. Let me go back to where this actually started, because 4 minutes and 11 seconds on a Thursday evening is not where anything starts. It's where things become impossible to ignore. Lansing in July has a particular quality of heat, not brutal, not dramatic, just persistent, the kind that settles into brick and asphalt and stays there into the evening so that even after dark the city radiates warmth like something that has been holding it in reserve. We had lived on Fernwood Avenue for 6 years, in a 2-story Craftsman with a porch Ethan used as a launching pad for his bicycle and a backyard I had spent 3 summers trying to turn into something a garden catalog would recognize. Our life had the solid, organized texture that Natalie was very good at creating. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a regional healthcare network, good salary, flexible hours, the kind of job that required a specific skill for managing the perception of things, for presenting a coherent and attractive surface to the world. She was excellent at it professionally. She was, I understand now, equally excellent at it personally. The trouble began, or rather, became visible, the previous July, 11 months before Frank's accidental call. We had gone to Natalie's parents for the 4th of July, the same thing we did every year. Frank and Diane lived in Traverse City, 4 hours north, in the house Natalie had grown up in, a cedar-sided place on a quiet street 3 blocks from the lake, with a garden Diane maintained with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that growing things was the most honest available response to the passage of time. The weekend had been pleasant on the surface. Ethan had been ecstatic. He worshipped Frank, who had an inexhaustible patience for throwing a baseball and pretending to be losing at board games, and Diane always had projects waiting for Ethan's visit: a birdhouse to paint, a recipe to help make. Natalie had been warm and social and present with her parents in the way she was always warm and social and present with her parents, performing, though I didn't use that word then, the role of a daughter who had built exactly the life her parents had hoped for her. What I noticed, for the first time that weekend, was the gap between Natalie with her parents and Natalie with me. Not dramatic. Not a coldness or an avoidance. More of a compression. As if the warmth she radiated in the living room with Frank and Diane was a different voltage than what she had available at home. When her parents were watching, she touched my arm when she laughed. She referenced shared memories, told stories that included me as a full participant, made the marriage visible and comfortable and good. When we were alone, in the bedroom at night, in the car on the 4-hour drive back, she was quieter. Not unkind. Just contained. Like a thermostat that had been turned down. I told myself it was the natural deflation after a social weekend. Extroversion is exhausting, even when it's genuine. I was good at finding the reasonable explanation. But the compression didn't lift when we got home. It had been there before the trip, I realized. I simply hadn't named it. The warmth that appeared reliably in social contexts and contracted in private. The way she engaged fully with Ethan, with her colleagues, with the neighbors she liked, and engaged with me at a slight remove, as if I were one layer further away than everyone else. I am by nature a man who trusts. Not naively, I'm not without perception, but fundamentally. My baseline assumption about the people I love is that they are operating in good faith, and I hold that assumption until the evidence against it becomes impossible to ignore. It is not stupidity. It is a value. Or it was. I have revised my thinking on this since. The revision began in August. Natalie started working late. Not dramatically, 1 evening a week, occasionally 2, the kind of schedule that any marketing coordinator at a healthcare network might plausibly keep during a campaign launch. She mentioned a campaign launch. I nodded, helped with Ethan's dinner, noted that she seemed more energized returning from these late evenings than the ordinary workday seemed to warrant. Good meeting? I asked once, when she came in at 8:30 with a particular brightness about her. Really productive, she said. We're finally aligned on the messaging. Good. I handed her the plate I'd kept warm. Ethan drew something for you. It's on the fridge. She went and looked at it. I watched her face in the kitchen light, genuinely soft, genuinely moved by the drawing, whatever it was. A house, probably. Ethan went through a phase of drawing our house from every possible angle, as if he was trying to understand it from the outside. The brightness she'd come in with was real. I just didn't know yet what had produced it. The first concrete sign came in September, and like all the signs that mattered, it arrived through the most ordinary possible channel, the cell phone bill. We were on a shared plan. I paid it every month without looking closely, the way you pay bills for things that run smoothly. In September I looked closely for the first time in 2 years because I was trying to track down a charge I didn't recognize, and I scrolled through the itemized calls and found a number I didn't know appearing with a regularity that stopped my scrolling. Not dozens of times. Not the volume of something dramatic. 8 calls in 4 weeks, ranging from 12 minutes to 47. The 47-minute call was on a Tuesday evening when Natalie had been, as far as I knew, in the living room while I was putting Ethan to bed. I had come downstairs to find her on the couch with a book. The call had been made from the driveway. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I Googled it. No result, a personal cell, unlisted. I wrote it in the back of a notebook I kept in my camera bag. Then I put the bill away and said nothing. I was practicing, already, the art of carrying something without showing that I was carrying it. I had more practice at this than I knew. October in Lansing settles the way October settles everywhere in Michigan, with a kind of resigned beauty, the maples going red-orange along Fernwood Avenue, the air carrying the particular mineral smell of wet leaves and imminent cold. Ethan started soccer. I shot a 3-day corporate campaign in Detroit that kept me away from home longer than usual and came back to find that the house felt slightly different in a way I couldn't locate. Not anything moved or changed, just a quality of atmosphere, like a room where a window had been recently closed. Natalie was attentive when I returned. Genuinely attentive. She'd made dinner, Ethan had made a card, there was the warmth I associated with her social register rather than her private one. I was glad to be home. I filed the observation about the atmosphere and let it go. The number appeared on the October bill 6 more times. I still hadn't called it. I want to be honest about why, not because I was afraid of the answer, or not only that. Because calling that number meant deciding to investigate, and deciding to investigate meant accepting that my baseline assumption, good faith, honest season, weatherable difficulty, might be wrong. I had built 11 years of my emotional life on that assumption. Taking it apart required something I wasn't ready to spend. Instead, I started paying attention to the edges of things. The way Natalie's expression shifted when her phone buzzed in the evening, a micro-movement, almost invisible, a slight reorganization of her features before she reached for it. The way she had started keeping the phone face down on surfaces, a habit I associated with teenagers but had never noticed in her before. The way she occasionally laughed at something on the screen before she remembered I was in the room. None of this was evidence. It was all explicable. I was aware of both things simultaneously. Cooper Walsh noticed before I said anything to him. Cooper was my closest friend. We'd met in college, both studying visual arts. Both ended up in Michigan, though he'd gone into architectural design while I'd gone into photography. We had dinner together every month or so, the four of us, and in October he and I grabbed lunch alone while our wives did something separately, and somewhere in the middle of the second beer Cooper put his glass down and said, "Are you and Nat okay?" "What do you mean?" "I mean you seem like someone who's working very hard at seeming fine." I looked at him. Cooper had a gift for precise observation. It was what made him good at design, the ability to see the actual shape of things rather than the intended one. "We've had a rough few months," I said. "Rough how?" "Distant. Not fighting, just not present with each other." Cooper nodded slowly. "Have you told her that?" "I've tried." "What happens when you try?" I thought about it. "She gets very reasonable. She agrees that things have been hard, she says she knows she's been stressed with work, she makes a specific plan for how we'll do better. And then nothing actually changes." "That sounds exhausting," Cooper said. "It sounds like someone managing the situation," I said. And then I heard what I'd said, and Cooper heard it too, and we sat with it for a moment. "Ryan." "I know," I said. "Have you considered?" "I know," I said again. We talked about other things after that. But the word had been said, or almost said, and I couldn't put it back in the place where I'd been keeping it. The second thing that hardened my suspicion was a Saturday in November. Natalie had taken Ethan to her mother's for a long weekend, a regular thing. Diane loved having Ethan alone, and Natalie used the drive to spend time with her parents while I stayed home and caught up on work. I was going through my camera equipment, cleaning lenses, the specific meditative work of a photographer on a quiet weekend, when my phone rang. The number on the screen was the one from the bill. I stared at it through 3 rings. Then I answered. Silence. Then a man's voice, careful, uncertain. "Hello? Hello?" I said. A pause. "I'm sorry, I think I may have the wrong number. I was trying to reach." He stopped. "Who were you trying to reach?" I asked. The line went dead. I sat in my studio for a long time after that, with a lens cloth in my hand and the specific stillness of someone who has just had a hypothesis confirmed. His voice had been the voice of a man who had been trying to reach my wife, realized he'd reached me, and hung up. That was the only reading the situation supported. I had been building alternative explanations for 2 months. The alternative explanations were over. I am a photographer. My professional life is organized around the ethics of capturing truth, what the image actually shows versus what the subject wants it to show, the difference between the constructed surface and the real one. I have spent 15 years thinking about the relationship between appearance and reality, between the story an image tells and the story behind it. None of that preparation made what I did next feel less like a violation of who I wanted to be. I hired someone to find out who owned the number. Not a private investigator. I didn't go that far, or not immediately. A friend of a friend who did digital research, background checks, the kind of work that exists in the gray space between what's publicly available and what feels like it should be private. His name was Adrian, he charged a flat fee, and 2 days later he sent me a name. The name was Derek Souza. 39 years old, project manager for a commercial real estate firm downtown, divorced 14 months ago, living in an apartment complex on Michigan Avenue. No obvious connection to Natalie's workplace, no shared social network I could identify. The connection, as far as I could reconstruct it, was a marketing conference Natalie had attended in June, 9 months ago, 1 month before I'd noticed the thermostat change at her parents' house. She came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw my face. "Your dad called," I said. "Wrong number." Natalie was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds I watched her run the calculation, what Frank would have said, how much I would have understood from it, whether there was a version of this she could still manage. Her face was very still. The stillness of someone making decisions quickly behind a composed surface. "Ryan. He mentioned the counseling," I said. "He mentioned how glad he and Diane were that things had settled down. That they were proud of us." I kept my voice flat. Even. The voice I use when I'm reviewing a shoot that hasn't gone the way it should, not angry, just assessing. "He thought he was calling you." She sat down at the kitchen table. Not across from me, at the adjacent corner, angled slightly away, her hands folded on the surface. An arrangement that preserved proximity while avoiding direct confrontation. I noticed it the way I notice composition. "How long?" I said. "Ryan, I need you to understand. How long have you been telling them we're in counseling?" She was quiet for a moment. "Since August." "Since August." I did the math. 7 months. "I know how it sounds." "I'm not asking how it sounds. I'm asking you to tell me what actually happened. The real version. Not the one you gave your parents." She looked at me for a long time. I could see the internal negotiation, what to admit, in what order, how much. This was not a woman about to break. This was a woman deciding what version of the truth she could hand me that would contain the damage. "There's someone," she said. "There was someone. It's over. Derek Souza." The name landed like a photograph placed on the table. Here is the actual image, not the one you composed. Something moved through her face. Not guilt. Something more like the careful readjustment of a person who has lost control of the framing. "How do you know that name?" "Because I've known for 4 months," I said. "I just didn't know what you'd been telling your parents until tonight." She absorbed this. I watched her absorb it, the understanding that the investigation she hadn't known about had run parallel to the narrative she'd been maintaining, that I had been gathering information while she'd been managing perception, that the gap between what she knew and what I knew was smaller than she'd believed. "The counseling story," I said. "Walk me through that. Ryan. I want to understand it. Not the affair, I'll get to that. I want to understand why you told your parents we were in counseling." She looked down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was careful and precise, not emotional, not defensive. The voice of someone who has thought about this and arrived at a position. "Because I couldn't tell them the truth," she said. My parents, you know what they built for me in their heads. The picture of what my life was supposed to look like. And things were falling apart, and I couldn't tell them that. I couldn't watch my mother's face when I told her. She stopped. So I gave them a version where we were still trying. Where we were getting help. Where it was hard but we were handling it. You gave them a version where you were a good wife working on her marriage. She didn't flinch. Yes. Instead of a wife who had been seeing someone else for 9 months. The two things are both true, she said carefully. I am, someone who was doing something wrong and also someone who couldn't face what that meant for how my parents see me. I know that makes it worse. I know that's not an excuse. I'm not looking for an excuse, I said. I'm looking for the actual story. She raised her head and looked at me directly. You want me to tell you everything? Yes. Then I will. But I need you to let me do it the way I can do it. From the beginning. Without you stopping me. All right, I said. I waited. She spoke for a long time and I kept my word and listened. It started at a conference in June, she said. Marketing and Media in Healthcare, downtown. Derek was presenting a session on campaign analytics. We talked afterward, professionally, genuinely professionally. He was smart and funny and he asked me questions about my work that weren't polite questions, they were real ones. I went home that night and I thought, that was a good conversation. That was it. Just a good conversation. She paused. Poured herself a glass of water from the tap. We exchanged cards. Industry thing. He emailed 2 weeks later about a project. Nothing, I replied. The emails kept going. They shifted from professional to personal so gradually that I didn't notice the exact moment they crossed over. By August I noticed. She looked at the glass. By August I had already been looking forward to his emails in a way I didn't want to examine. When did it become more than emails? October. We had coffee. Twice. Then dinner. She stopped. I told myself each time was the last professional meeting. I was very good at telling myself that. And the phone calls. Yes. From my driveway. A long pause. I didn't want you to hear. I know what that sounds like. I don't care what it sounds like. I care what it was. She pressed her palms flat on the table. It was someone who made me feel. I'm trying to find the right word and I don't want to use a word that sounds like an excuse, because it isn't one. He made me feel like a person who was interesting and capable and not just a person who managed the schedule and organized the household and maintained the infrastructure. She stopped. You're not a bad husband, Ryan. I need you to hear that. You're not cold or absent or cruel. But somewhere in the last 3 or 4 years I stopped being able to find myself in our marriage. Not because you took me away from myself. Because I let it happen and I didn't say anything and then instead of saying something I found a way to feel like myself somewhere else. Why didn't you say something? Because saying it meant admitting that something was wrong with us. And if something was wrong with us, I had to decide what to do about it. And if I had to decide... She stopped. Her voice was very controlled but something beneath it was not. My parents have been proud of me my whole life for doing everything right. Good grades, good school, good job, good husband, good child, good house. I have spent 35 years being the proof that they did everything right too. The idea of going to them and saying, I failed. My marriage failed. I couldn't be that person for them. So you lied to them? I managed what they knew. She said it without heat. I gave them the version where it was hard but recoverable. Where we were working on it. Where I was still the daughter they raised. But we weren't working on it. You were managing 2 separate stories simultaneously. Yes. And Derek? Her hands tightened slightly on the table. It ended in January. His choice as much as mine. We both. She paused carefully. We both understood that what we were doing wasn't what either of us actually needed. It was easier than either of us wanted to admit. I absorbed this. I thought about Frank's voice on the phone, They're so glad things had settled down. I thought about Diane saying you're handling it beautifully. I thought about 7 months of phone calls to Traverse City in which Natalie had narrated a marriage in careful, managed recovery. A marriage I had been inside without knowing the script. What did you tell them about the counseling? I asked. Specifically, that we'd been seeing someone every 2 weeks. That it was difficult but productive. That we were learning to communicate better. She said it evenly. I used enough real language, things I'd read about couples therapy, that it sounded credible. You researched it. I wanted it to be convincing. I looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs Ethan was sleeping with his soccer ball. The thing I can't get past, I said, is not the affair. Or not only the affair. It's the architecture of it. You built a structure, a whole separate structure, to hold the image in place while the actual thing was falling apart. You put more effort into maintaining the appearance than into the marriage itself. She was quiet for a moment. I know. Your parents are going to have to be told the truth. Something crossed her face, the specific fear I had been watching her manage for 7 months, the thing beneath all the management. Ryan. Not tonight. But they're going to be told. That's not negotiable. She closed her eyes briefly. I know. And whatever happens with us, whatever we decide, they hear the truth from you, not from a misdial. Yes, she said quietly. Okay. Yes. We sat in the kitchen until midnight. We talked about Derek, not in detail, not because I couldn't hear it, but because the details weren't the point anymore. The point was the architecture. The point was 7 months of Tuesday phone calls to Traverse City. The point was a 63-year-old man dialing the wrong number and accidentally dismantling the entire framework his daughter had constructed. Before she went to bed, she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and said, I'm sorry I made you invisible in this. That's what I did. I made you invisible in the story I told them. I know, I said. That was the worst part of it. Not the everything else. Making you invisible. I didn't answer. She went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table until the house had been silent for a long time, thinking about a photograph I'd taken once of a building being demolished. The specific moment when the structure was still standing but the interior had already been cleared, and from the outside it looked whole, and from the inside there was nothing left. We told Frank and Diane in April. In person, Natalie had wanted to call, and I had said no, that it required the weight of presence, that the people you've lied to for 7 months deserve to see your face when you tell them the truth. We drove up to Traverse City on a Saturday, Ethan in the back seat with headphones on, unaware. Natalie was quiet for most of the 4-hour drive. Not the compressed, contained quiet of the fall, a different kind. The quiet of someone who has stopped managing and started simply sitting with what is. Frank and Diane met us at the door with the warmth they always met us with, Diane taking Ethan immediately toward the kitchen where something was baking, Frank shaking my hand with the particular grip of a man who expressed affection through physicality. They looked happy to see us. They looked proud. They looked like two people who believed the story their daughter had told them. I watched Natalie watching them, and I saw the thing she had been protecting for 7 months, not an abstraction, not image management, but these two specific people who loved her, whose faith in her was written in the way they hugged her at the door. She had been protecting this. It didn't make what she'd done right. It made it human. We sent Ethan to the backyard with Frank. They had a project, some birdhouse from the previous visit that needed finishing, and Natalie and Diane sat at the kitchen table, and I sat with them, and Natalie told her mother the truth. Not all of it at once. Not in a single speech. It came in pieces, with long pauses between, with Diane asking quiet questions and Natalie answering them without deflection. The affair. The duration. The lies. The phone calls. The counseling stories she had been telling them for 7 months. Diane was quiet for a long time after Natalie finished. She sat with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold, looking at her daughter with an expression I found difficult to read, not anger, not disappointment in the simple sense. Something more like grief. The specific grief of a parent who has discovered that the child they were so proud of had needed help and had constructed elaborate systems to prevent being seen needing it. "Why didn't you tell us?" Diane finally said. "Because I couldn't be the person who failed in front of you. Natalie." Diane's voice was very careful. "We're your parents. You're not in front of us. You're with us." Natalie's face changed. The careful management she had been practicing for 7 months, the controlled presentation, the curated version, something in it came apart. She didn't break down, not completely. But she came close. Frank came inside to get Ethan a glass of water and found the three of us at the table. He read the room in 3 seconds and went back outside. He was, I realized, very good at knowing when to give space, a skill, probably, he had developed across 35 years of being Diane's partner. We stayed for dinner. Frank and Diane were kind to me in a way that cost them something, a conscious generosity extended across the knowledge of what had happened, an effort I recognized and was grateful for. At one point Frank pulled me aside in the backyard, where Ethan was trying to get a kite airborne in the insufficient April wind, and said, "I'm sorry my daughter put you in this position. Whatever you need, whatever you decide, we're not going anywhere." "I know," I said. "Thank you, Frank." She built her whole life around being okay," he said quietly. "She learned that somewhere. I suspect we taught her." I looked at the kite tangling in the light wind, Ethan correcting, adjusting, trying again. "She's going to have to unlearn it," I said. "She is," he said. "I think she knows that now." We tried for 3 months after Traverse City. Counseling, real counseling, an actual therapist named Dr. Okafor who had a quiet office near the Capitol and a gift for asking the question that was slightly to the left of the one you'd been preparing to answer. I went in wanting to fix things. I went in believing that the exposure of the truth, the actual, complete truth, no managed version, was the foundation we could build from. What I discovered in those 3 months was that knowing the full story and being able to live with it are not the same problem. I am, as I said, a man who trusts. I had rebuilt from lesser things before, professional setbacks, the ordinary disappointments of a life. But there is a particular kind of damage that comes from discovering that someone you loved had constructed a parallel reality around your marriage, that you had been cast in a story without knowing the script, that your patience and your faith had been narrated to her parents as evidence of her good choices rather than your genuine nature. It is not just betrayal. It is a specific erasure. The moment I knew we were done came in June, during a session with Dr. Okafor, when she asked me to describe what I imagined our marriage looking like in 5 years if things went well. I opened my mouth and nothing came. Not because I couldn't imagine it, I could build the image technically, as a photographer builds a technically correct image. But it would have been a constructed thing. A managed version. And I was done with managed versions. I told Natalie that night. Not dramatically. We were on the back porch, the June evening warm and still, Ethan asleep upstairs, Lansing quiet around us. I told her I had tried and I couldn't see forward and I thought we both deserved the honesty of that. She didn't argue. She nodded slowly, in the way of someone who has been watching a diagnosis approach and has had time to prepare. "I know," she said. "I've been watching you try." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't." She looked at the backyard. "I'm the one who—" She stopped. "I know. We told Ethan in July." He cried in the particular concentrated way of a 7-year-old confronting something too large for his framework, not understanding the whole of it, understanding enough. "We told him what you tell a child, that we both loved him identically and that wouldn't change, that families reorganize sometimes, that both of his parents would always be his parents." He asked, after a while, if he could still do the Traverse City trip in August. "Of course," Natalie said. "Can Dad come?" We looked at each other across the couch. "Maybe next time," I said. "This summer, it's just you and Mom. But Grandpa Frank is expecting you." He nodded. Then he pressed his face into my shoulder in the specific boneless way of children seeking comfort, and I held him and looked over his head at Natalie and saw something in her face that was past management, past performance, past the careful curation of how she appeared to the people she loved. Just grief. Plain and real. It was the most honest I had ever seen her. The papers were filed in October. Cooperative, careful, the logistics managed with the precision both of us applied to complex projects. The house stayed. Natalie found an apartment 3 miles away, close enough for Ethan to bike between us on weekends once we'd established the rhythm. Cooper and I had lunch the week the filing was complete, and he said nothing for a moment and then said, "I'm sorry. I know you wanted it to work." "I did," I said. "What changed?" I thought about the kitchen table in March. About Diane saying you're handling it beautifully while I held the phone and looked at my wife's coffee mug on the drying rack. About a man named Derek Souza whose voice I had heard once on a phone call from my driveway. "I found out I'd been a character in a story someone else was writing," I said. "And once you know that, you can't unknow it." Cooper nodded. "She called me last week," I said, "to talk through the school schedule. She sounded different. Lighter." I thought about it. Like someone who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally set it down. "That's good, isn't it?" "It's good for her," I said. "It's what she needed to find." I picked up my camera that afternoon, the medium format film camera I use for personal work, not client work, and walked to the park 3 blocks from Fernwood Avenue and shot a roll of nothing in particular. The light on the water tower. A dog sleeping in the fallen leaves. 2 kids running a kite in the late October wind, the string going taut, the whole thing lifting. There is a principle in photography about the frame. The frame is a decision, what you include, what you leave out, where the edge is. Every photograph is an argument that the world looks like this, within these specific limits. The skill is knowing where to draw the edge. Knowing what actually belongs in the image. I had spent 9 years inside a marriage where the frame was being managed by someone other than me. Not maliciously. Not without love. But managed, curated, the edges set to produce a specific appearance for a specific audience. I draw my own edges now. The frame is mine. Ethan came back from Traverse City in August with a finished birdhouse and a drawing he'd done with Diane. Our house, from the outside seen from the front yard. Meticulously detailed. Every window in the right place. The porch, the garden, the specific angle of the roofline. He'd written at the bottom, in the careful block letters of a 7-year-old learning the weight of words, home. I put it on the refrigerator. It's still there. Some pictures tell the whole truth. Natalie didn't lie to her parents because she was a dishonest person. She lied to them because she had spent her entire adult life understanding her own worth as a function of their perception of her, and the affair, the failing marriage, the distance she felt from herself inside a life she had built correctly, all of it threatened the one thing she had never learned to live without, the belief that she was still doing everything right. This is what the story ultimately reveals, that the most dangerous lies are not the ones we tell the people we're betraying, but the ones we tell the people we most need to impress. Ryan knew something was wrong. Derek Souza was, in some sense, a symptom that could be traced. But Frank and Diane Mercer, sitting 4 hours north in Traverse City, receiving carefully narrated phone calls about counseling and progress and managed recovery, they were the true audience Natalie was performing for. And as long as that performance held, she didn't have to reckon with what she was actually doing. What is striking about the accidental exposure, the wrong number, for minutes and 11 seconds, is how structurally inevitable it was. Not that particular call on that particular Thursday, but something like it. The architecture of parallel realities is inherently unstable. The more elaborate the maintenance required, the more points of failure accumulate. Natalie had been sustaining 2 separate narratives for 7 months. The story she told Ryan through silence and deflection, and the story she told her parents through active construction. Both required ongoing management. Both were always one misdial from collapse. Ryan's excessive trust, his core flaw, is worth examining precisely because it is not a weakness in any ordinary sense. He trusted because he valued trust, because he had built his identity around being the kind of man who extends good faith. The same quality that made him a patient and generous partner made him catastrophically slow to act on what he was already observing. He had the evidence in October. He had the phone bill, the mileage discrepancies, the behavioral changes. He chose, each time, to find the reasonable explanation. This is not naivety. It is the cost of a very specific kind of integrity. What neither of them did was speak clearly about the condition of the marriage before it required a misdial to force the conversation. Natalie felt herself disappearing inside the life she had built, and said nothing, because saying it required admitting imperfection to the people she most needed to see her as perfect. Ryan felt the thermostat change, noted the atmospheric shift, and filed it somewhere he didn't have to open, because opening it required confronting something that might cost everything. Two people, in different ways, choosing the managed version over the honest one. The 3 months of real counseling were not a failure. They were the most honest thing either of them did, the attempt to actually look at what was there rather than what they wanted to be there. That the attempt ended in June is not a tragedy of incompatibility. It is a recognition that some structural damage, once fully visible, cannot be designed around. Ryan saw it clearly and stopped pretending he didn't. What stays with me about this story is the image of Diane sitting at her kitchen table in Traverse City, wrapping her hands around a coffee mug gone cold, saying, "You're not in front of us. You're with us." 7 words that Natalie had apparently never heard, or heard and been unable to believe. The entire machinery of the deception, the managed phone calls, the counseling fiction, the curated recovery narrative, all of it existed because Natalie could not trust that being seen failing would not mean being failed in return. That's not a character flaw. That's a wound that looks like a strength until it isn't. The question the story leaves me with is quiet but persistent. How many of us are managing the version of our lives that the people we love most are allowed to see? How many marriages are held in place not by honesty but by the effort of maintaining an image for an audience that would, if given the chance, simply love us through the truth? We protect people from knowing us. We call it consideration. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is the most expensive form of distance there is. Ryan deserved a partner who could let him see her clearly. He also deserved to have asked for that years before the frame broke. Both things are true, and neither makes the other easier to carry.